What would it mean to you today if you could move away from needing the approval of other people, being bound by the approval of other people, and being able to simply find validation in yourself, not needing to get the validation from other people? How would that change your life? What kind of impact would that make? Would it make you happier? Would it make you less stressed? Would it make you more peaceful? And many of us don't even realize how controlled we are by seeking the approval of others, by needing the validation of others. That goes back. Welcome to Inspire Me with Jay, a podcast discussing meditation, the near death experience, spiritually inspirational and transformative experiences. Welcome to Inspire Me with Jay. I'm your host, author, and teacher, Jay Spillers. Today we're talking about validation. And so many of us seek validation in other people, and we don't even understand how deep it runs. I've been listening to various speakers on this topic, and one in particular, his name is Aaron. And I've been doing this conscious business accelerator. It's been changing my life. It's been changing my perspective. You know, a lot of us have probably heard, don't seek the validation of others, don't seek the approval of others. Just validate yourself. It only matters what you think. It only matters what you believe about yourself. We've probably heard that 100,000 times. And at a surface level, most of us would probably agree with that. But how do we get there? How do we get it internalized? How do we get it deep within our soul? That's what we're going to be talking about today, because when you do that, that can change everything. And I've just been sort of having an epiphany this last week. And it was a couple days ago in a meditation. I was just kind of like, oh, it hit me. Getting validation simply from myself and not relying on other people, and understanding that this is the key to everything, that your life has probably been held back because you're seeking the validation and approval of others. Your happiness and peace has probably been conditioned on seeking that validation and approval from others. Runs so deep, it starts with our parents. I can even remember from an early age, and it didn't happen all the time, but there was an instance. I was probably about 4 years old. My sisters were teenagers. There was a lot of fighting and striving at that time. My sisters were into like drugs and alcohol, and one of them ran away for a month, went to a different state. My parents did not know how to deal with that, did not have the ability to cope with that. This was the 70s. My parents were raised in the 50s. It was like, and my mom had issues to begin with because, she had been institutionalized when she was 18, and then again right after my birth. So it was just crazy, chaotic. And seeing this as a 4-year-old just was earth shattering. It changed my life and the trajectory of my life clear up until present day, because I remember an instance when I was 4 years old where my mom had told my dad to just get my sister, threw her on the ground, started hitting her. And I was like, I'm 4 years old watching this. And it's like, oh crap. It sent a message to me that you better not mess up too bad, because you need this approval because something bad can happen. So I was always like straight and narrow because of this abuse. And most of what I experienced wasn't even the physical and seeing the physical. it was the verbal, because I can just remember the anger, the hostility in my mom, the rage. I think she was bipolar and just always seeking that approval, always seeking to smooth it out so that I could go forward and, just live. Living in fear is what it was. And I can just remember like when I was 4 years old, that's around the same time, just walking in as a kid saying hi, and she was upset about something and just snapped at me. And it was like at that moment, I just said, I'm never going to say hi to her again. Unless she says hi to me, I'll reciprocate, but I'm never going to initiate saying hi. I mean, and this may sound mind blowing, but this is the kind of fear that I lived in. This is the kind of approval that I sought. It was just crazy. And even when she did say hi and was friendly, I'd say hi back, but it felt weird. It felt almost kind of cringe, like I reluctantly have to say hi because I'm expected to, but you know, it just felt weird. And to imagine that kind of relationship with your mom. And this is kind of where I was and needing that approval. And then there was another event when I was in seventh grade. I lost my backpack and they're looking for my backpack. And she got so angry. And she was like, she said the thing that you're never supposed to say to your kid. I mean, I remember hearing this in the 80s. Do not ever say this kind of thing to your kid. But she said it, and she said it exactly like this. I wish you were never born. And I tried to just not pay much attention to it. But that impacted me. And I was constantly seeking approval and validation there. And it's kind of like the speaker was talking about, Aaron. When you don't feel like you're getting the love and the approval from your parent, you kind of substitute it with attention seeking. And that's kind of what I did. I'm kind of a quirky person to begin with. I'm kind of weird, kind of different. But it was kind of like Jay, weird, nerdy, different on steroids in school. So I was like super nerd, like, you know, like Steve Urkel level, like way beyond Screech or something. So that's kind of what I did because I was like, well, if I can't get the love, I can get attention and I'll let that substitute. But I'm still seeking some kind of approval or validation. Maybe in a sense, I was trying to be the class clown, and they had some class clowns that, were more popular than me. I guess I was the almost the class buffoon beyond lower than a clown. But that's kind of where I was. And I can remember another time, um, not with my parents, but with a bully in eighth grade. His name was Joe. And this kind of deeply wounded me too, because I was changing things like, especially as a teenager and, around that age range, changing the way you look, trying to fit in. I actually was getting a little less nerdy, trying to fit in. And then you had this bully that was like, everything about you was wrong and stupid and this and that. And, you know, your hair is stupid. You look stupid. You look, like whatever. We said gay back then, but um, you're a dweeb, you're a this, you're a that, you're not cool. And it was sent and he was very mean about it. And I can remember going out for soccer and, of course, Joe was a good player. was like fantastic primo, and I was not the greatest soccer player. So he teased me about being a crappy soccer player. He teased me about how I looked, how I talked, how I did this, how I did that. And I remember being brought to tears several times. And of course, he fed on that. And Joe had a sidekick. His name was Andrew, who would like participate. And it was kind of ironic too, is that Andrew, when he was by himself, when Joe wasn't there, was a pretty okay guy, you know. He'd some get in trouble with the teachers and stuff. It was kind of not the greatest student, but he wasn't so bad when he wasn't around Joe. But when he was with Joe, he was Joe's bully sidekick, you know. Joe was the Batman, he was the Robin. And those two just shattered me. And I can even remember, you know, even a few years ago, still experiencing trauma because of that, feeling like I never fit in, like I was never good enough, you know, and I took that out on other people. I can remember a couple years after that event saying something to somebody on a bus, you know, like making fun of them. They had a mohawk and whatever, but you know, just saying something mean and thinking years later, why did I do that? That was stupid. I mean, you know, it's not the way I'd wear my hair, but you know, of course I don't have any hair now, but but just thinking I was probably impacted by Joe, and then it kind of like, you know, created that ripple effect in me where I was hurtful to other people. I can remember being hurtful to people I loved, you know, because, you know, we talk about with the near death experience, the ripple effect, and it goes both ways. The ripple effect of kindness can go out in love in positive ways, but the ripple effect of hurting other people and demeaning other people, that goes out too, unfortunately. And that's what happened with me. I became sort of a version of Joe, and yet that's something I would never want to be. And luckily, at least in this case, Joe was more of the verbal bully. He wasn't really a physical one where, you know, he would like get in fights with you and stuff like that. There was a couple fights he got in, but they were usually kids that he had bullied and then, you know, retaliated on him and then he'd get in a fight. But he wasn't, for the most part, a physical bully. He was more of the verbal kind, you know, just demean and insult you. So, you know, there was that. And I can just remember the hurtful things that he said. I mean, it almost would have been easier if he, you know, would have been the physical bully and just left it at that because the verbal scars went a lot deeper, you know. And even then I kind of realized that he was hurting me because he himself was hurt. You know, this was a Christian school. So, you know, his dad was a pastor and his dad spoke at the chapel. And you could kind of get the vibe when his dad was there that he was like prim and proper, a stick up the you know what. The vibe was there. And you could see Joe sitting there as his dad was speaking, kind of like this, you know, like just like with this look on his face of this absolute disgust. So his bullying was a result of his relationship with his dad, because his dad probably, you know, just being such a hard ass was probably just on him all the time, you know. So in a sense, he's probably getting kind of bullied from him, and then he's taking it out here. I wasn't the only kid he bullied, but seemed like he would just sort of pick a kid and then work on them for a while. Like I was the kid to be bullied for several months, and then like the next school year, he moved on to a different kid, and kind of left me alone and was somewhat okay with me. But that's just the way he was. Pick a kid and just, demean, insult, whatever. I'm sure if it left scars on me, it probably left scars on that other kid that he did the next year, you know. But sometimes even realizing that they were probably bullied themselves doesn't always take away the pain. It can help you to understand it a little bit better, but it doesn't always take it away. And, same thing for my mom, that she was adopted, and my grandma, who was the adopted grandma, obviously, was very stern and very harsh, very demeaning towards her. So she's a reflection of what her mom was, her adopted mom was to her, and thinking back on it, probably being adopted, even though she, says she loved her family, and I'm sure she did. Sometimes with adopted kids, they still feel a bit of rejection, even if their adoptive parents are the most wonderful adoptive parents in the world, you know. So there was that too. So it's just sort of this cycle that goes on. And I can remember seeking approval from other peers too in school and just not getting it. The even when I went from being super nerd to trying to be a little more cool, a little more stylish, the kids were a little better to me, but I was still seeking that approval. Sometimes I'd get it, sometimes I wouldn't. Certainly didn't get it from Joe. But like with girls, it was like I was still kind of nerdy and stupid with girls, and kind of like Steve was, and Steve Urkel and Screech there, you know. But I can remember this one time where I'd kind of befriended this girl in ninth grade, and we kind of talked before school started, and we had some good conversations, and you know, there was a few times I think where she came and she had like a nice outfit on. She wasn't considered one of the prettier girls. She wasn't super horrible, just kind of average plain. And she had a nice outfit on, and I complimented her on her outfit. Wasn't trying to, get anything from her or manipulate her or anything like that. Just, no, she had a nice outfit, and I said so. And I think that kind of drew her to me. And I didn't even realize till years later that I think she kind of liked me. And I thought, well, maybe I should have been listening for the signs more, but it was okay that she was my friend. But, just kind of seeking that approval from a lot of girls, and I never really got it. And the one that I think did kind of like me, I didn't have a clue on. But, and I think even as an adult, moving past the kids in your school and the girls and the bullies and your parents, you still have that thing set up where I was seeking approval. Like I even notice it like with my wife, like I'm definitely a people pleaser. I've definitely been a people pleaser. I'm a people pleaser to get that validation. And I do with my wife, and sometimes she gets to get kind of annoyed. And I even kind of notice that, I kind of do it with my son. He's 11 years old, trying to get validation from your kid, you know. And I think we do that with society too, because, if you're not successful, at least financially, and you don't do this and you don't do that and you don't measure up here, we don't feel the validation. We don't feel approval. So there's sort of this where we seek approval and validation in a societal sense too. It doesn't necessarily have to be a specific person or persons, but just from society. Like, I don't really fit in. I don't look like what most people are out there. I don't fit the boxes. I don't look like what a ideal husband, father, man looks like. I'm working on trying to develop qualities that are positive, masculine, feminine. I did a talk on that a few weeks ago, but I don't fit the categories of whatever the ideal self is that society has. And now we have clashing ideals because, one group says a man should be like this, another group says a man should be like this. One says you should be more like this, you should be more like that. So it's like, and it's like, shoot, I don't fit in any of these categories, you know? So, when we're trying to just do this validation, it's just crazy. And here's a validation. Do you need to be validated by God? Because I think coming from a evangelical background, this is a big deal, because God has to approve of you, because yeah, there's the fear of, well, if you don't get God's approval, you could end up in a dark pit, So what about that? And I think, at least with God, and this is what I've learned from the near death experience, is that God doesn't judge us, He allows us to judge ourselves. He's only involved in the judging process insofar as He is there sort of guiding us in evaluating our life. And that's more of what it is, evaluating our life so as to help us grow spiritually. So God doesn't judge us. God has unconditional love. God has total acceptance. So the only one, in a sense, that we need to really get validated from outside of ourselves, though we could argue it's not really outside of ourselves, is God. And you've got that. um, God will allow you to judge yourself and put yourself in dark places, in hells, both literally and metaphorically in this life and the next life. God will do that. He will let you judge yourself. He will let you, if you feel that you deserve darkness, we have free will and we can put ourselves in pretty dark places. God will allow that. So, in a sense, God's allowing it. But God isn't really ultimately the one putting you there. You are. And that's sort of a mind blower right there, because so many people are trying to seek the validation of God. And even when you get into like some of these more evangelical fundamental theologies like Calvinism, well, I'm the elect chosen one. The question really comes up. How do you know you're elect? Well, I have assurance of my salvation. How do you know you're really saved? How do you really know? You can kind of do some evaluation and maybe I'm there, but how do you really know? And that's kind of where I find a lot of these very rigid uh, theological perspectives not very satisfying, because I want to think I'm the elect. I want to think I'm got assurance. I want to think that I'm a true believer, but how do you know? What if you're a fraud? What if you're just fooling yourself? I mean, that thought always comes up. And I think if they're honest with themselves, which many of them weren't, they'd have to admit, how do I know deep down? Because I could be a fraud. I could be one of those ones that thinks they're all that, but they're not. But when you start to realize that none of that matters because God has unconditional love, God has total acceptance, God doesn't judge. And if we find ourselves in dark places here or in the next life, it's because we at some level felt we deserved it. Then it's like, oh, cool. you know, if God accepts me, you know, why don't I accept myself? And that kind of gets into, okay, so we have all these things where we're seeking validation and approval from externally out there, society, from our parents, from members of the opposite sex, from our peers, you name it. How do we break free from that? And I think one thing is just to realize it when you're seeking it, to stop and evaluate, am I upset in this moment because I don't feel validated in this moment? Like, you know, your spouse tells you you got bad breath and you get all in a tizzy. It's like, well, am I upset because I didn't get the approval here? I mean, I put a piece of gum in the mouth. Who really cares? You know, we've all had bad breath. It happens. So it's like, do I need to get in a tizzy about it? Or I get mad at someone. Is it because I didn't get the approval? Someone gets mad at us and we start to feel fear or we start to feel anger back or we start to feel hurt. Is it because we're seeking the validation and approval here and they're not giving it to us? You know, because when you start to realize it and you start to just let it go, it's like, it's the most liberating thing because then it's like, I don't need to feel hurt when someone says something that's insulting to me. I don't need to feel afraid because someone is threatening me. I don't need to feel like I'm not good enough because someone said, oh, you didn't do this good, or you're crappy at that. It's like, I don't need that. It's like when you get to that point, it's like, whoa, it's liberating. The only approval I need is from within. I've already got God's approval. And if God approves of me and loves me unconditionally, maybe I could do that for me. And that's another point where it all starts, besides just sort of being aware of what's going on in terms of, am I seeking approval out here? Am I seeking validation? Is to start to cultivate self-love. Because if you want to grow spiritually, if you want to move up on a spiritual plane, the start point is self-love. Because you can't really love other people. You can't love God until you start to love yourself. And once you start to love yourself, it grows outward. Loving others, loving God. And it can change you. So realize when you're seeking validation, if you find yourself feeling stressed about something, feeling fearful, feeling threatened, feeling angry, stop and ask yourself, am I seeking validation? Start working on self-love. And part of self-love is to really understand and believe exactly who you are. And this starts with like the affirmations I do first thing in the morning before I even get out of bed or before I fall asleep. It starts in meditation, and meditation is probably the most powerful tool you have to start to transform how you perceive yourself. but you are a pure white light being. This is confirmed in the near death experience. You are a brilliant white light being. And it's not just BS that I'm telling you to make you feel warm and fuzzy. That's what's reported. You are the light. You are light. You are part of God. That's not just to make you feel good. That's not just, that sounds nice. That's the truth. And you've got to believe it if you want to change your life. I am a pure, beautiful white light being. Start there. And at the core of your being, this white light being that the near death experience talks about, at the core of your being and the core of everyone's being, because everyone is a beautiful white light being, is love. You are pure love. The people that have hurt you are pure love. The people that you love are pure love and white light beings just like you. And you have to really start to believe that within your soul. And then things will start to change and start to affirm it because that's where the change goes. You got to believe this. It's got to be ingrained in you. So I think understanding who you are and understanding and realizing when you have these emotions that is it coming from validation and that I only need my validation from within myself and I can have it. And I've got this. I have got this. I am enough. I am beautiful. I am perfect. I'm white light. I'm love. I'm peace. This is my authentic self. I'm going to align with my authentic self. And that's where it just needs to go. Start aligning with who you are authentically. I think that's where the change comes. And, one thing to think about, you think, okay, well, if I don't need anybody else's approval, I don't need anybody's validation, and it just matters that I get my own validation, am I going to be a jerk? Because I don't care what anyone else thinks or feels or whatever. And it's like, no, it's the opposite. Because when you start to validate yourself and love yourself, you'll start to be a better person to begin with. You'll be kind instead of nice. And that's one thing I've been listening to too is, well, what's the difference between nice and kind? Nice is that I try to do good things to make you happy to get approval, but I have no boundaries. I can't say no. I'm stuck. But kind is I do good things because of the love that flows out of me. I don't need your approval. I don't need you to stamp my card. I can have boundaries with you and just straight out tell you no, but I can be kind out of a heart of love. So really, you're more of a jerk, if you will, by needing the approval of others than if you just validated yourself. And something to realize about validation is that when you get the approval of others, it's not like, okay, I got the approval, I'm all good to go. You continually need more and more approval because it's kind of like, approval is like a nice dinner. You eat it up, it's gone, and the next day you're hungry again. And that's the way approval externally works. You need it on a regular basis, and it doesn't ultimately satisfy you. It takes away your power because when you are constantly seeking the approval of others, you're giving your power away to other people instead of realizing that you have power within yourself. And I think that's key to understand too. Don't give your power away. I think we talk in the modern society, and we talk about certain ideologies that put people in a victim oppressors category. And what's going on there is the victims want this approval from the oppressor. They want to demean and insult the oppressor, but they still want the approval. It's like, if you don't call me my pronoun, I'm not getting approved. If you don't do this, that, and the other thing, I'm not getting approved. It's like, if you're approved within yourself and you feel yourself as, it's like, I don't give a crap what pronoun you use. I don't care if you call me, dipshit. I don't really care. You can call me ma'am and honey, and I don't really care because I don't need your approval. And you don't either. You don't need my approval. You don't need me to address you a certain way, to find your validation. That's just something interesting to think about. But we're going to go ahead and do a meditation now.
You're listening to the Inspire Me with Jay podcast. Please do like and subscribe to the channel, bringing hope and inspiration to the world.
So let's just close our eyes, allow yourself to relax and get comfortable. We'll go ahead and take in a few deep breaths. Breathe in deeply through your nose, hold, and then exhale through your mouth. Take in a few deep breaths. Breathe in, hold for about 8 seconds, and exhale through your mouth. Breathe in, and exhale. Breathe in, and exhale. Breathe in, and exhale. Now just imagine yourself in a beautiful place. What would that be for you? Might be a garden, might be the beach, might be sitting on your porch. Pick that beautiful place for you. Put yourself there. What's in this place? What do you see? What do you hear? Can you feel anything in this place? Can you smell anything or taste anything? Maybe you don't, but maybe you do. Now go back to your childhood for a moment. Do you ever feel like you were a letdown to your parents? Do you ever feel like you didn't measure up? You weren't enough? Maybe think of a specific event where your parents or one of your parents made you feel like what you did wasn't good enough, that you didn't measure up, that you weren't a good kid. try to look at that without judgment, but just recognize how you felt in that moment. Now try to maybe think about where your parent was coming from. Did they have hurt in their life? Did they have feelings of not measuring up? Maybe you don't know, but maybe just try to think for a moment. Maybe they did. Maybe this is a cycle. Try to understand from their point of view why they did what they did. Now, for that child, just imagine out of your heart love flowing to you as a child in that moment, allowing it to flow over that child who is you, so that they know that they are loved and that they are worthy and that they're enough. Shower yourself as a child with that in that moment. Now, to the parent or parents who hurt you in that moment, who rejected you or made you feel less than worthy, send love to them in that moment. Send peace and kindness. Now let's fast forward a little bit, maybe to junior high or high school, late elementary. Did you ever have a time where you had a bully or your own peers collectively made you feel like you weren't worthy, like you didn't measure up? Like you just felt bad about yourself. Maybe remember a time where they said something or did something and it really hurt. Just allow yourself to connect with those feelings. Detach from it, but allow yourself to be aware of these feelings. Sometimes in being aware of the feelings and just sitting with them, it takes the power away from it, and you can start to begin to heal. Now, try to think where these kids were coming from, whether it was your peers or a bully. Are you aware of any insecurities that they had? Maybe they didn't feel like they were enough or rejected in some way. Maybe they were bullied too. Try to see where they're coming from in this moment. Now look at yourself as a kid or teenager in that moment and allow from your heart love to flow to yourself. Shower yourself with love and kindness and an awareness that you were enough then and you're enough now. You're more than enough now. And that pain was only a perception because you craved approval. But within yourself, you were enough and you were loved. You were loved unconditionally by God, and you were loved deep within your own being and soul. You were worthy and you are worthy. Just feel that for a moment. Now just go to the bully or the peers and just from your heart, shower them with love. Send them with love. Both in that event, that time, and today, wherever they are, even if they passed. Send love and vibrations to them. Chances are they needed love, and they were seeking the validation just as you were. Just send them love. Send them your acceptance as a human being. Now let's fast forward to current times. Who are you seeking approval and validation from, if anyone? And it could be multiple sources. Are you seeking approval from society? Seeking approval from an employer, your spouse or loved one, your children, people in your church? Who are you seeking validation from? Allow yourself to just see that need for validation just evaporate, just fly away. And start to validate yourself within yourself. Start to love yourself, care for yourself. We'll do a couple of affirmations now. Our first affirmation is, I am enough. I am enough. Say it within your soul, within your being. I am enough. Now let's do another affirmation. I am a beautiful white light being. I am a beautiful white light being. Say that several times within your being. I am a beautiful white light being. Now let's do the third and final one. The core of my being is love. The core of my being is love. Say that several times within your being. The core of my being is love. Now, before we close out, I just want to say to yourself, be patient with yourself as you start to move away from validation, of needing validation from others and getting it within yourself. That it's probably going to be a process for most of us. It's not necessarily going to flow overnight or just in one meditation. But start to affirm who you are within your being. Look within your being. Recognize that only you need to validate yourself. We'll start to come back to the room. Let's take in one final deep breath. Breathe in through your nose. And exhale. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes.